A short note before we start. The following episode includes descriptions of disturbing violence. Please take care while listening. Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. I'm Shirley Leung. What does justice mean when a mentally ill person takes a life? Lindsay Clancy will be on trial later this year for killing her 3 kids in Duxbury. But before Clancy, there was another similar story. In 2018, a mother in Brockton, Latarsha Sanders, killed her 2 young sons while having a psychotic episode. But the tragedy doesn't end there, says Globe columnist Yvonne Abraham. Yvonne recently wrote a 7-part series revisiting the Sanders case. It turns out Latarsha Sanders was prosecuted by Tim Cruz in Plymouth County. He's the same district attorney who is now charging Clancy in the Duxbury case. Yvonne followed the thread.
So I ended up writing a column about the Sanders case. I spoke to her attorney, and my conversations with him convinced me that there was a lot more there to look at. I was interested in how much attention the Clancy case had gotten and how little attention the Sanders case had gotten by comparisons when the two situations were so eerily similar.
Latarsha, Black mother, living in Brockton. Meanwhile, Lindsay Clancy, white, a nurse, married to a tech executive, living in Duxbury, one of the wealthiest towns in Massachusetts. It seems like you were wondering, would the outcomes be different, right?
One of the things that I really was hoping to pursue when I reported these stories on Latarsha Sanders was to look at how inequality affects the totality of someone's life and not just what happens once they get into the courtroom. And so right from the beginning, you could see in Latarsha Sanders' stories the fruits of that inequality. Her family was very suspicious of psychiatric help, and so they didn't seek it for her, but not just because they were suspicious of therapy, but also because they were worried that if they raised the alarm about Latarsha, that her children would be taken away by the state.
Mm-hmm.
Once she was arrested, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know that she needed a lawyer right away. They didn't know that she needed to be Mirandized, told of her rights in a way that made her consent with knowledge and her full will. The effects of those inequalities just kind of dominoed until she got into the courtroom, where it was easier for the prosecutor to argue that she wasn't mentally ill, but that she was evil.
So one of the things that struck me reading this series is when Latarsha went into psychotic episodes, I was thinking, what would I have done? And I don't know. I think I would have been paralyzed like her family. I don't know what I would have done. I think I would have done exactly what they did, was just hoped it passed. Maybe you could take us to that moment. I mean, you must have felt that when you were interviewing them and reviewing the documents of that moment when Latarsha, went into a psychotic episode and what they did or didn't do.
Sure. I mean, I think it always had passed in the past. So a couple of years before she killed the boys, Latarsha started behaving more erratically and irrationally more regularly.
Mm-hmm.
And so she developed this obsession with the Illuminati, this idea that there was some secret cabal of people running the world. She saw conspiracies everywhere. She thought that the neighbors were listening in on her. She thought a friend of her daughter's was trying to poison the family. At one point, she showed up at her daughter Shirley's house and begged her to leave with her because she was absolutely certain that someone was trying to kill Shirley and she wanted to save her. All of these things are signs that we know in retrospect are the precursors to psychosis. But oftentimes, it's not even clear to a clinician that that's the case. and they're professionals. So if you're a family who's not used to dealing with mental illness, who doesn't know how to connect the dots, and more importantly, doesn't know what to do once you have connected those dots, it's impossible. And no matter how ill she was, Latarsha still managed to look after her children. She still got them to doctor's appointments. She still made their birthdays special. She carried around ultrasounds of her younger son, Lason, in her bag. Like she carried around 12 ultrasound pictures of this kid, for 5 years. She loved those children and she gave them a good life. She would take them to the park and have them chase the birds around. She would take immense pride in her cooking, and she carried around a giant bag, a handbag full of the business of motherhood, appointment cards for the doctors, artwork from her kids, math exercises, doctor's instructions, prescriptions, those ultrasounds. Like anybody who has children knows that, that's all the stuff you need to carry around to do your job well. That's who she was.
I mean, one of the things that you did in the series, which I don't really recall seeing in many other stories, which is you actually embedded audio. Talk about some of the audio that featured in your series.
So I think a really significant piece of the audio was the interrogation of Latarsha Sanders by the police at Brockton Police Station just a couple of hours after her son's bodies were discovered.
So we're just going to kind of walk through, again, what happened last night. And if you can kind of just kind of fill us in. We have some more questions for you, kind of fill in the gaps until we kind of try to understand what happened and why.
In that interview, which stretched on for over an hour, you can hear her making very little sense.
When did you go there?
Today.
Today?
Mm-hmm.
No, you didn't go there today. No.
Maybe,
You stabbed Marlon and Lasan last night, so you didn't go there with the babies.
Yes, said it was the ritual, the violent and the son.
It was very clear that she was not rational. She was very suggestible. She's simply not making any sense at all. Police asked her what she did after she killed the children, and she said, "I went to the cashier." They asked her what else she did, and she said, "I went to the police station, but I didn't go in because it had bad reviews on Yelp." Now, you would think that the police would stop the interview with answers like that and conclude that the person who's speaking to them does not really understand what is happening. But instead of doing that, the police either accused her of lying or went with her irrational statements themselves. At one point, the police said to her, "Well, you can't believe the reviews you read on Yelp." The whole interview was like that, where she was extremely suggestible, where she would go off on these completely irrational tangents that revealed nothing besides the fact that she was dealing with a very serious mental health episode. And the most striking example of her incompetence in this interview came at the very beginning when the police tried to read her Miranda rights.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to talk to a lawyer for advice before we ask you any questions and have him or her with you.
They needed her to sign a piece of paper to say she had understood her rights and agreed to waive them. And they asked her, "Do you agree to be interviewed?" And she said initially,
Is that no? Yes or no? I need you to say yes or no.
Yes, no.
I spoke to a couple of experts on interrogations who said that at that point they would have suspended the interrogation because it was clear that she was not waiving her rights voluntarily. But instead they continued with the interview, and it never got any better. She never got any more rational than that. But at the end of it, she had said enough that would allow them to put up a first-degree murder case against her.
And normally, someone would have a lawyer by then, right?
Yes.
She wouldn't be speaking by herself.
Ideally, someone would have a lawyer by then, but we know that it doesn't always work that way in the criminal justice system. Certainly, Lindsay Clancy never once spoke to the police without an attorney present because her family had the resources and the presence of mind and the knowledge to know that that would be very bad for her. But that comes back to the theme of all of the inequities in this case, right? I mean, if you don't have a familiarity with the system, if you don't feel empowered with that system, if you don't have the resources or the contacts to navigate the way through that system, then you're going to be at this massive disadvantage.
And in revisiting this case, you spent a lot of time with her family. What was it like talking to them, and what was their reaction to your series?
They were so incredibly generous with their time and with their lives. They are dealing with a double tragedy. They not only lost Marlon and Lason, who the whole family adored, obviously, they also lost the woman who killed them. They feel doubt and guilt, but mostly they feel this really sharp sense of injustice that what happened to her after she killed the boys should not have happened, that it does no good to punish a mentally ill person for something they did when they could not control their actions. It doesn't take much to bring it all up for some of them. They really hope that her appeal is successful and that maybe she will get another chance, that she will be placed in a facility dedicated to treating mental illness rather than a prison.
What's the goal of revisiting this old case? You know, what did you hope to get out of this, and what do you hope readers get out of this?
This was a story not just about this family and this horrific thing that happened and all of the cascading tragedies that followed, but also about a system that does not treat everybody equally. A system that piles punishments upon people who start at a disadvantage. I had hoped readers would think more deeply about mental illness and about how difficult it is to avoid its consequences, even for the luckiest people. And my wider hope is that it prompts people to take a closer look at the criminal justice system as a whole, at the power prosecutors have to determine the fate of someone even before a case goes to trial, simply with the charges they choose to bring, at the conduct of prosecutors in the courtroom who can get away with tactics that seem incredibly unfair to me. And then I hope that the judges considering her appeal give her a second chance, give the whole system a second chance.
You're a mom too. And so what was it like reading about and reading those documents, reading the transcript, revisiting this case of a mother killing her children?
There's one picture we ran with the series that gets me every time, and it is this picture of Latarsha and her husband Edson celebrating Marlon's last birthday, his 8th birthday. And Marlon was an amazing kid, and he, from the very start, he wanted to have girls' things. He loved princesses, and his favorite color was pink. And his sister Shalia said that she was pretty sure he would grow up to be a member of the LGBTQ community. And this family not only accepted who Marlon was they embraced him as he was. You know, his grandmother tied little extensions into his hair, and Shalia bought him a pair of heels for Christmas because he loved her so much. In that last photograph, his birthday cake has princesses on it. As a parent, that was the most difficult to take. I think that this family, that this mother loved her children as much as I love my child, and that no one could save them.
More of my conversation with Yvonne Abraham after a short break. Yvonne, let's talk about this insanity defense. That's what Latarsha's lawyers were using, hoping that she would not be sent to prison for life. What does it mean legally?
So when a defendant pleads not guilty by reason of insanity, they generally concede that they did the thing they're accused of doing, but that they are not criminally responsible for doing that. What that means is that they either could not understand the wrongfulness of their actions, or they could not conform their behaviour to the requirements of the law. Now, it's the prosecutor who has the burden of proof in these cases. The prosecutor has to prove that a defendant like Latarsha Sanders both knew what she was doing wrong and was able to control her actions. If the prosecutor doesn't satisfy both of those requirements, then the defendant is supposed to be acquitted by reason of insanity. But in practice, that happens very rarely when these cases get before juries. Together with colleagues, I collected about 100 cases in which the defendant used an insanity defense, and 41 of those cases were decided by juries. And of those, only 5 resulted in not guilty by reason of insanity.
Oh, really? I didn't know it was that low.
Verdicts. It's extremely low.
Wow. So how is insanity generally proven in court then?
So generally, the prosecutor and defense will each present an expert who will testify as to the defendant's mental status at the time of the crime. And so the prosecutor will present somebody who says that the person either wasn't mentally ill, or that even if they were mentally ill, they were criminally responsible because they could understand what they were doing was wrong and they could conform their actions to the law. The defense will put up an expert to say this person was so impaired by mental illness that she could not do either of those things. This case was unusual in that though the defense did put up an expert to say those things, the prosecutor put up no expert at all.
That was shocking reading that.
Yes, and a few of the attorneys I spoke to were also amazed by that. They did not put up an expert, I presume, because the expert they did hire came to conclusions that were inconvenient for their case.
Right. In this series, you're pretty tough on the prosecutor working for Plymouth DA Tim Cruz. So what is the prosecutor's job here? I mean, isn't it to pursue the strongest possible charge? Or do they have to take mental illness into consideration from the get-go? One could argue that the prosecutor was just doing her job.
The job of a prosecutor, according to the rules of conduct in this state, is not to get convictions, but to do justice. And those things are not always one and the same thing. So I spoke to experts who said that the prosecutor's job in this case was to do what was just. And if their own expert had delivered a finding about her mental illness that was as vague, as inconclusive, as supportive of the defense case as it was, that they should have reduced the charges to second-degree murder In this state, that means that the case could have been heard by a judge alone and not by a jury. When an insanity case is heard by a judge, it's more likely that the defendant will be found not guilty by reason of insanity.
I mean, why is that? Are judges, less affected by the emotion of seeing children killed?
Absolutely. I think the judges are better at being focused on the law, screening out the appeals to emotion, which were legion in this case, and deciding purely based on the facts before them.
Mm-hmm. In the series, you raised a really provocative question about juries, whether they're equipped to even adjudicate cases where the sanity plea is invoked, and maybe they should all go to judges. I mean, can that be done? Can that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think we ask too much of juries in insanity trials. We ask these ordinary people to leave their lives for days on end, to sit in a courtroom and decide the fate of somebody who's done something horrific. They're subjected to really graphic and upsetting testimony and pictures. They also have to pick through really complicated medical issues. And then they have to decide whether or not to punish someone who has done something that is abhorrent. Mm-hmm. They're only human. It's only human to want someone to pay for taking the lives of 2 children, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. even if they weren't really responsible for their actions. I do think it's too much to ask them. I do think we should find a way to avoid taking every insanity case on a first-degree murder charge to a jury. I do think we ought to make the change that would allow a defendant to elect to have their case heard by a judge alone. It would require an immense amount of change. It's hard to gather up the political will to make a change like this, particularly for a population that is so hidden and so...
I mean, laws would need to be changed.
Absolutely. Yes. But more importantly, it would require changing attitudes that have been intractable for so long.
Mm-hmm. So the Lindsay Clancy trial is set to take place this year. This is the Duxbury mom accused of killing her 3 children. What are you going to be watching for in this case?
I don't know if the prosecutor will conduct this case in the same way as he did the case of Latarsha Sanders. I know for sure that more people will be watching him in this case, and that fact alone will make it easier for Lindsay Clancy to get more just treatment in the courtroom. It's a treatment I think she deserves, as does Latarsha Sanders.
So what's next for Latarsha Sanders?
Her attorney has filed an appeal arguing that crucial medical records were excluded from the courtroom in Latarsha Sanders' trial, and that those records, the exclusion of those records, meant that she was not given a fair trial. He's also alleging prosecutorial misconduct and asking that, based on both of those things, that the Supreme Judicial Court grant Latarsha Sanders a new trial. The Supreme Judicial Court will hear the arguments and decide whether or not Sanders can have a retrial sometime this year.
What do you hope to see?
I hope they grant her that retrial. I think what happened in that courtroom in Plymouth was incredibly unjust, and that we owe it to Latarsha Sanders, to the boys she killed, and to mentally ill defendants in every courtroom to have what happened in Plymouth County corrected.
I mean, Yvonne, your series went a long way to showing us that Latarsha Sanders does deserve another trial. So, Yvonne, thank you for being here. Yvonne Abraham is a columnist for the Boston Globe. We'll link to her remarkable series in the show notes. Yvonne, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Say More is a production of the Boston Globe. Today's episode was produced by Anna Kusmer. Our editor is Jim Dow. Our engineer is Uzair Ahmed. If you like the show, please follow us and leave us a review. You can email us at saymore@globe.com. I'm Shirley Leung. Thanks for listening.